The courtroom
If
was
it please
cold,
the court,
and my father made
we are
sure
here
his
today
voice
to
was
ensure
colder.
the
She
final
runs a
wishes of my
laundromat,
late
he said
uncle
to the
are
judge,
honored.
gesturing toward me like I was a piece of evidence rather than his daughter. A laundromat, Your Honor. She folds strangers' clothes for a living, and she thinks she's qualified to have any say in how my company is divided among the family. A ripple of laughter moved through the small gallery of relatives who had shown up for the hearing over my late grandfather's business holdings. I sat there in my one good blazer, the one I kept in the back of my closet for occasions exactly like this, and I said nothing, because I had learned years ago that my father only ever heard the sound of his own certainty, never the substance of what anyone else had to say. If you've ever had a parent stand in front of people who matter and reduce your entire life down to something small enough to mock, you already know the particular sting of that silence, and I promise you, what happens in the next few minutes of this hearing is something you are not going to see coming. My father, Harold, had built his identity around appearances long before I was born, and after my grandfather passed, he became obsessed with proving he was the only capable heir to the family manufacturing business, the one worth trusting with decisions, contracts, and legacy. I had spent the last 9 years quietly running a small laundromat 2 towns over, the kind of place with humming machines and flickering fluorescent lights, and my father treated that choice like a personal insult, a stain on the family name he never stopped bringing up at holidays. What he didn't know, because he never once asked, was that the laundromat wasn't the whole story. It was simply the visible half of it. Judge Whitfield called for order and asked my father's attorney to continue, outlining his objection to the will's provision, granting me equal voting shares in the family company, shares my grandfather had specifically requested I receive despite my father's protests. The attorney repeated much of what my father had already said in the hallway, painting me as unqualified, uninvolved, undeserving of any real influence over decisions that mattered. When it was my attorney's turn to respond, she simply asked to introduce financial disclosures related to a separate holding company registered 9 years earlier. The same year I opened the laundromat, a holding company that had quietly acquired the building housing my father's manufacturing plant, 3 commercial properties adjacent to it, and a controlling stake in the regional supply chain contractor his company depended on for nearly 60% of its materials. The room went still. My father's face shifted from confidence to confusion. "What holding company?" he asked, leaning toward his attorney, who looked equally lost. My attorney explained calmly that the laundromat had never been my only venture, simply the one visible enough for my father to comfortably dismiss. The real work had happened quietly, patiently, over years of reinvested profit and careful acquisitions, precisely because I had learned from watching my father that loud ambition invites resistance, while quiet competence tends to be underestimated until it's too late to matter. My grandfather had known about all of it. He had, in fact, been one of my earliest advisors, meeting with me privately for years, teaching me things my father was always too busy performing success to actually learn. Harold stood up abruptly, his voice cracking with something between disbelief and panic. "This is absurd. This can't be," and then, mid-sentence, his hand went to his chest, his face draining of color as he stumbled back into his chair, then to the floor, the room erupting into chaos as the bailiff called for medical assistance. I was at his side before I even registered moving, my hand under his head, telling him to breathe, to stay with me. All the courtroom posturing gone in an instant, because underneath every insult he had ever thrown at me, he was still my father. And some love doesn't disappear just because it's been buried under years of disappointment. He survived a minor cardiac event brought on by stress, the doctor said, and in the quiet hospital room afterward, once the machines had settled into steady rhythms, he looked at me differently than he ever had before. "You own the building my factory sits in," he said quietly, not as an accusation this time, but as a man trying to understand a daughter he realized he had never actually known. "I do," I said, "and I was never going to use it against you. I just wanted for once for you to see me as someone capable, without needing a courtroom to prove it." He reached for my hand, his grip weaker than I remembered, and said the words I had waited most of my life to hear. "I'm proud of you. I should have asked more questions instead of making so many assumptions." The estate matter settled quietly in the weeks that followed, generously, in a way that gave my father dignity and gave me the voice my grandfather had always intended me to have. We talk most days now, my father and I, and he asks about the laundromat with genuine curiosity instead of quiet contempt, though I think we both know now it was never really about the laundromat at all. If someone has ever measured your worth by the smallest visible piece of your life, remember that the fullest truth about you rarely fits inside someone else's assumptions. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs the reminder today. Tell us in the comments what part stayed with you, and stay close, because there are so many more quiet stories still waiting to rise.